This episode is brought to you by the Command Presence Leadership Institute. Find out more by visiting commandpresence.net.
Welcome to the Faces of Leadership with Michael Warren. Be the leader you wish that you had.
Welcome, everybody, to the inaugural episode of the Faces of Leadership podcast. Most podcasts would probably call this episode 1, but we like to do things a little bit differently here. So we're going to call this episode 00, ground zero, if you will. And what we're going to do today is we're just going to do a quick primer to give our listeners an idea of what this podcast is going to be all about and what we hope to accomplish during the podcast. I'm your host, Michael Warren, and I work with Command Presence Training as the Director of Training, but with me I have a couple of rock star guests. I have John Bostain, who is the CEO of Command Presence Training, and I also have Ronnie Carnahan, who's the COO. There's a lot of O's going on here. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Mike. We appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely, Mike. Thank you. Looking forward to it.
So, John, let's start with you, because this podcast is really kind of your brainchild. When you were thinking about what we were going to do, what we wanted to accomplish on the podcast, what was the primary reason for doing this?
You know, Mike, you've been with us a long time, and you know our mantra is basically iron sharpens iron. So that's always been kind of a theme for us. And we started off primarily as a public safety training company, but we started to expand. And to be honest with you, when it really hit me, it was I went to the John Maxwell, it's called the International Maxwell Conference, and I just was surrounded by so many people from different industries and different ages. And just there's such a diverse group of amazing people there. And as I was watching what's going on, I just kept thinking to myself, what can I learn from all these people? What can I learn from a school teacher? What can I learn from a coach? What can I learn from somebody that maybe in a nonprofit? And this idea just kept kind of eating at me. I'm like, you know, whether you're a leader of a big multi-million dollar Inc. 5,000 company or, you know, Fortune 500 company, or if you're a 12-year-old that started a nonprofit, I felt very strongly that we can learn from each other. There's always something that we can learn from each other. I was thinking about, again, John Maxwell's question, or he has a statement. He says, everyone deserves to be led well. And so how could we come together and bring people from all different industries, all different ages, races, ethnic, just this entire group of people, and just fundamentally ask the question, what can I learn from that person? What's one or two things I can learn from that person? And that's really where the Faces of Leadership idea came from, is just how do we learn from each other?
So if I could just expand on that a little bit, one of the things that I know that you and I have talked about over the years is that we see leadership as being about two things. It's about people and it's about actions. It's not tied to a title or a position of authority.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if I had one goal for this, is that every week that we put this podcast out, I hope that in some way it's adding value to people, right? At the end of the day, that's what it's always about. So the diversity of guests that we have on from so many industries, what can we learn from them? And then how does that add value? Because that's a big deal of leadership, right? It's not, as you said, it's not about title or anything like that. Our fundamental focus from leadership is how do I add value to others? So absolutely. I think this is just another way of helping us accomplish that.
And speaking of adding value, I want to talk to Ronnie for a second, because Ronnie, in the grand scheme, the lifetime of Command Presence, he's relatively new to the training company, but Ronnie brings a unique type of leadership to Command Presence. Because folks, if you haven't dealt with us before, been to one of our classes, John and I, we are primarily on the curriculum instructor side of things, but Ronnie was brought in because we needed some leadership on the business side. And so, Ronnie, I just want to ask you, from a leadership perspective, is it difficult sometimes for a leader to perhaps lead up, is the terminology we use, to someone who is of a higher formal authority rank than perhaps you are?
You know, Mike, that's a really good question, because one thing that we've learned, especially going through this training, is that the key position that we always hear, especially from the public safety side, is what's the most favored position you guys have ever held, is the sergeant position. Did you feel like you always had the most impact? And one thing that I've learned through my career is that mid-level supervisor, no matter it's public safety or private sector, is to be able to lead up, lead down, and lead horizontally. And that's one key that I've learned even being here, because, with you and John, you guys' experience as trainers is unbelievable. And that's why I joined the company, because the impact you guys are having out there. But the ability to what I'm able to do is kind of bridge that gap from my perspective, bridge the gap between the public and private sectors, is because that what we're seeing is that's why we're doing this podcast, is because leadership, the faces of leadership, comes from many different perspectives. Like John said, is whether you're a 12-year-old starting a nonprofit or you're a senior leader at a Fortune 500 company, your always ability to learn and be receptive to learning is critical. So to go back to your original question is that it is unique. And then if you know John and what he does and brings to the table from a training perspective, I can't do that. I can't coach him on how to do that. But what I can do from a business perspective is how do we take this to make sure everyone out there hears our message and understands what our mission is? Because what we're seeing is that we're not just a training company for law enforcement and public safety. We're getting pulled into the private sector because they need it as well. We've all been promoted into a position, whether it's a first level supervisor in public safety or your first sales manager or whatever that position is in a company. We always get trained in management, but never leadership. So what we're seeing is that void in the private and public sector, try to pull those together, because both of them together impacts our communities. And that's the unique thing that I bring to the table, is being able to bridge that gap.
So, John, would it be safe to say that effective leadership has impact both internal to an organization and external to the organization? The problem becomes if it's not intentional leadership. Effective leadership doesn't care if the leadership's good or bad, the content's good or bad. It's just effective. The training, it really tries to combine the effectiveness with good content.
Yeah, I think that's really important, Mike, because what happens a lot of times, we've all attended training and we like it, right? We've attended leadership training. We get excited about it. Sometimes it energizes us. But I think what is missing a lot of time is some type of practical rollout, executable tool when we get done, or implementation strategies, things like that. I love going to a leadership training that's full of quotes and things like that. But I need more than just quotes, because those are good for me personally. They excite me and they give me a different way of thinking. But where I think the gap in leadership training overall is that we don't have a lot of practical ways of executing on the things that we learned. And I think it's so true in public safety, but I'm starting to find more. It's so true across the board when it comes to leadership. We still get kind of siloed, right? So certain industries think about leadership a certain way, whether it's education, whether it's government, whether it's public safety like us, whether it's technology, whatever that might be. And again, that was real reason I wanted us to start this podcast, is that I know there are things we can learn from the tech sector. I know there's things we can learn from people that are government contractors, or again, I know there's things we can learn from nonprofit organizations or the faith community, things like that. And so what I want to do here, though, is not just have philosophical, inspirational content. Like you said, it's got to be more than content. I do want inspirational, motivational content. I want that. But we should be able to then take that and do something with it and put a plan in place. How are we going to execute it? Because traditionally what happens is we send people to leadership training and they get a lot of personal growth out of it, but they're not sharing it with everybody else. So it's not impacting the organization in a positive way. So I think that's something for us to keep in mind. And again, that's really why I want this podcast to be successful, is because I know there's things we can learn from each other, but I want the structure, and I know you've already planned on this, but what I really hope the structure for all of us is we learn something and then we've got a couple action steps towards the end of each podcast. Says, okay, now what am I going to do with this information? That's where real leadership is going to occur, right? You need to get the information and then you have to have action steps to carry it out. So it goes beyond just having great content and great trainers.
Now, Ronnie, this right here, you and I, we've talked along with John. We see this as a part of a larger endeavor that we refer to as the Command Presence Leadership Institute. And that institute, that leadership training and that leadership consulting and that leadership development is designed for both the public and private sector. You're on the business side of things. But if somebody wanted to find out more information about the Leadership Institute, what would be the best way for them to get information or to get in contact with you so they could see what we're all about?
First of all, it's a really good point. So what we've been talking about is the Command Presence Leadership Institute, and not just for public safety, but for everyone. So as you learn more, one is stay tuned, continue to listen to the podcast. But more importantly, you'll be able to go to our website at commandpresence.net, and we're going to be launching soon the Command Presence Leadership Institute part of that. And with that, you'll be able to learn more about where we're going to be holding multiple trainings throughout the country, different modalities such as this podcast. And one thing that we've talked about continuously is that how do we take action like you and John discussed, but literally how do we get to people the way they want to consume content? That's whether it's through a podcast, attending a class face-to-face, or even some online tools that with some micro-learning opportunities. So stay tuned because we're going to be launching that here shortly at commandpresence.net.
It's a really exciting time here at Command Presence. John, as somebody who's been around since the beginning, how does seeing all this come to fruition? What's that got to feel like for you?
What a great question, Mike. We started this company. There was just two of us, and it's a huge learning curve. I knew that we were able to deliver very high quality training. The thought of building a business, I don't think I really knew what that was going to entail back then when we first started. But the biggest thing that I know we've done well, better than, I would actually just say better than most, is surrounded ourselves with amazingly talented people. I think that's the biggest lesson I learned. And now, 7 years later, it's starting to come to fruition. Had I just stayed, myself going out, doing some keynotes here, a couple of presentations, we probably would have been fine. But that's not really what I wanted. I wanted us to have a positive impact across the country. So I just started surrounding myself with great people, great trainers, great minds, people who challenge the status quo, people who are just never satisfied with the way things are. And as we did that, we started to grow, started getting more notoriety around the country and things like that. I have to admit that we're further along than I thought we might be. I didn't know that it would result in where we are today. You've heard me say it before. I'm really, really proud of our organization. We're selected as the 2023 Georgia Veteran-Owned Small Business of the Year. And the reason that's a big deal to me is that I tell people, I think my biggest contribution is that I happen to be the veteran in the veteran-owned small business. But it's a testament to a small company, a young company like ours, the amount of talent and the great people we have on our team. I think that's what was recognized when we received that award. And so I just want to keep going from there. I want to continue to add high-quality people with the focus on our positive culture. And again, the purpose of this podcast is I want to learn. I just so enthusiastically want to learn from others. I'm looking at this podcast as something that I hope will enhance the Command Presence Leadership Institute, but I'm just looking at it for some personal growth, right? I know that I will be consuming the podcast myself because I know there's so many things I can learn. But yeah, we've gotten a good start. We've got a great team of people, and I can't wait to see what's going to happen over the next couple of years as we just continue to add talented people.
And so, folks, those of you who are listening, that's where we need your help. We know some really good people, and we have some amazing guests lined up to be on here over the next few months. But what we're looking for is we're looking for shining examples of effective leadership where people have influenced their communities, both internal and external, for the positive. Here's the other thing, because you're going to hear on here, especially from me, times where we messed up, where we didn't do the right thing, where we tried something and it didn't work, but we didn't let it keep us down, and we came back because as John Maxwell talks about, expanding your circle of influence. That's what we're looking for, people who are interested in expanding that circle of influence and are willing to share their experiences so that others don't have to go the hard way. That's the only way that we as a society, we as a community are going to get better. And Ronnie, I think one of the things that you talk about often are our community impact partners. This is a different type of community impact partners. If we can get the leaders to come on here and we can learn from each other, like John said, then our communities can't help but be impacted.
Absolutely, Mike. That's a really good point, because one thing we're doing with the CPLI and with Command Presence, one thing that we saw, especially over the last few years, is the gap between the public and private sectors, and not wanting to publicly support the public sector, meaning our first responders and our public safety. So what John and I saw early on is, how do we help? How do we give back to our communities by impacting them positively? And we couldn't think of a better way of what we do well, and that's provide incredible training. And a lot of times it's our leadership that took off, our leadership training, because what we describe, it's actionable, it's action oriented, not just you're going to get the quotes like John mentioned, but we're going to give you action to how to go back and impact your agency. But more importantly, what we saw is that there are companies out there that want to support their communities or give back. And what a better way to impact their communities positively is than to provide leadership to their public servants. And so what we did was give them the platform to be able to do that. They can give back. We go into a community together and we provide leadership training to the executive and command staffs of agencies. And that way the communities positively are impacted because they're better leaders. We know that a better trained officer and a more educated officer and even leaders make better decisions and impact the communities more positively. So that's what we're doing. That's where our community impact partnerships come from, and we're going to continue to grow. And so if that's something, if you're a business leader or someone in your community and you want to give back, please reach out to us. We would love to help be a part of that.
So as we're wrapping things up here, folks, let me kind of sum things up here. This podcast is a way for Command Presence to give back to the community. This is a way for us to make an investment in our community, but it's also a way for us to make an investment in each other. Whether you're a listener, whether you're a guest, whether you work for Command Presence, it is a way, as John said, of iron sharpening iron. And it's something we're going to do on a weekly basis. We're going to be very intentional about it. We'd love to hear from you. Reach out to us through our website, commandpresence.net. We'd love to hear from you. We've got some great guests lined up. I can't tell you how excited I am. In fact, I talked to one of our first ones this morning. He and I spent probably more than a podcast length time on the phone just talking with each other. And when you talk with people like that, the excitement that it builds and the recognition of how things could be if we just learn from each other and work together. So I'm excited about this opportunity. John, Ronnie, I know that you guys are excited, but for our listeners, please reach out to us. If you've got an idea for a topic, if you know somebody that you think would be a good guest, shoot that to us and we will do our best to get them on. Keep an eye out on social media for some announcements about the podcast. And we hope that you guys will come back regularly and listen to what we have here. But John and Ronnie, thank you so much for being on. We appreciate it. Thank you for this opportunity. I hope that you guys get out of it what you hoped you would.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. We appreciate that. We're looking forward to the journey.
Absolutely, Mike. Thank you. We're really happy that you're here and being the face of this podcast, and we're honored to launching this together.